Hey again, it's time for another set of my nostalgia trip games. And this time we're going to take a look at the first 5 games for the 8-bit Atari computers. But I have to be honest with you, I can really only mention a handful of 8-bit Atari games being truly nostalgic for me, at least in the common sense, because I didn't really get to play much on one of them back in the day. The equipment used for this and subsequent Atari 8-bit videos is this Atari 800 XL, and currently my only means of getting games loaded in, apart from a couple of loose cartridges, is an SD card reader I also bought from Lotharek. The game I remember most fondly from the Atari 800 games that I played as a kid is this legendary space shooter called Caverns of Mars, developed by a teenager by the name of Greg Christensen in 1981. As it happens, it's also one of the very few famous Atari 8-bit games that have never been converted for any other machine. Well, at least not at length. To me, this game is as good a reason as any to dig up my Atari and have a blast. Caverns of Mars is basically a vertically scrolling version of Scramble, in that you fly your spacecraft downwards through various cavernous passages, shoot some alien things for score, and shoot fuel packs to get more fuel into your system. There are 5 difficulty levels to get through, each one more devious than the previous, so there's enough of a challenge to last a while. Sure, it's a bit ugly and doesn't sound like much, so it's not nearly the best that the Atari 8-bits have to offer, but it's very playable and addictive, and it's a game that I think no Atari gamer should pass. Blue Max has, for as long as I can remember, been considered a classic on any platform anyone ever played it on. Of course, living in Finland, most of my friends knew it on the Commodore 64, but it was also released on the ZX Spectrum, and originally it was written for the Atari 8-bit computers. By a stroke of luck, I managed to actually play the original Atari version first. To be honest, I only have vague memories of that one time I played the Atari version when I was a kid, but I played Blue Max a short time afterwards on both the C64 and ZX Spectrum, and I remember comparing them to the Atari game and thinking, no, that's not quite it. Which I guess is how the idea for the comparison blog initially started, albeit unknowingly, all those years ago. Naturally, I wrote a comparison of it. Click on the link below. Blue Max is a World War II based diagonally scrolling shoot 'em up with a nice emphasis on the third dimension, in that your mission includes bombing certain targets on the ground. You also need to master taking off and landing in order to get anywhere, and you can withstand a certain amount of hits from enemy fire, but each hit takes away some of your plane's capabilities, bringing a nice touch of realism into an otherwise arcadey game. I remember some of my friends used to brag about having been able to fly under the bridges, and still do, which I admit is a neat trick for a game of this age, but it's hardly necessary. I remember having done that in the Specky version, but whatever. It's the challenge that matters in all its relative shortness and the depth of gameplay, which can be surprising for a game from 1983. It's a good choice for any nostalgia trip, really. If you consider Blue Max as one side of a particular kind of a coin, then this cheerful little platforming collect-em-up called Henry's House was the other side of the same coin for me. Okay, I might need to elaborate a bit on that. See, Henry's House was originally made for the Commodore 64, but I first saw and played it on the Atari 800. I didn't learn this fact until well into the age of emulation, though. Back in the day, I used to think Henry's House was an Atari original because it felt more correct there. And more correct it is too. The music is more orchestrated than on the C64, and it plays correctly too, whereas in the C64 version some note timings are too short. The game itself isn't much different, but there are some notable adjustments here and there, for better and for worse. But I can't say it's truly any better or worse on either C64 or Atari, but I'm more nostalgic towards the Atari version. If you want to know the real differences between the two versions, I wrote a comparison of it some years ago, to which you can find a link below in the video description. For this particular game's acquaintance, I can thank my brother, because he was the one that was first obsessed about Rally Speedway, and it was also one of the first games I can remember him being obsessed about, which progressed to a mild fandom of racing simulations. Although Rally Speedway offered massive amounts of fun in the way of having a track editor, the game's original 2 tracks took our entire time on the Atari back then, trying to best each other and get better lap times on different settings. Of course, as fate would have it, we would later be playing the game on our C64 instead, a couple of years after having first gotten introduced to it on the Atari. Happily for us back then, the C64 version had more tracks, but the Atari version always looked and sounded a bit better, and because of that, it's one of the few games that I go to when I'm nostalgia tripping on the Atari 800. And it's also the first original cartridge game that I ever bought for my Atari 800 a few years ago. Better late than never, I guess. Oh yes, and once again, you can find a link below to a Finnish retro game comparison of the game. Finally, I have to mention Alley Cat, since it was one of the first games I found out for the Atari 8-bits through emulation over 20 years ago. So it's kind of nostalgic already. I'm gonna have to include this game on a DOS episode as well in the future if possible, because I first played Alley Cat on a CGA-equipped MS-DOS PC almost 30 years ago. It's just that the Atari version is so much better. You get more color, better sounds, and even the controllability is slightly better than in the DOS version, but mostly it feels right at home on the Atari. For those of you who haven't played Alley Cat, your job as the Alley Cat is to make your way into opened windows above your alley, complete missions of various types which will give you a permission to enter a stage in which you need to reach your girlfriend and give her a loud smacker and initiate fireworks. Easier said than done, as usual. Most of the game is not much more than jumping around, but the fun is in learning how to jump, where to jump, and perhaps even why. Even if Alley Cat was not really part of my childhood's experiences with the Atari 800, it's a game I have come to revisit more on the Atari than on the DOS-based PCs for good reasons. And on that note, guess what? I wrote a comparison of Alley Cat in April 2015, which you can read by clicking on the link below in the description. More of this sort of pseudo-nostalgic coming up later.